Southampton Arts Center is celebrating its 10th anniversary. We have been here for the community, and we hope that you, the community, will consider supporting us by becoming a member, subscribing to our email list, and following us on social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you, Christina, and thanks Southampton Arts Center for collaborating with us again. Another year of Doc's Equinox, which is our contribution to the environment. Before we get started with this film, Invisible Hand, I want to thank our sponsors, NYU Langone and Wainscott Farms, for their generosity in helping to put this program together. So thank you. Please come back tomorrow for another wonderful cocktail reception and a fabulous film, The Grab. And it's about other countries grabbing our resources, including water in Arizona. And then on Sunday at 2 o'clock is Patrick and the Whale, which is, as Deborah said, a love story. So come and see that.
My name is Pete Topping. I'm the Peconic Baykeeper and Executive Director of Peconic Baykeeper. And we're an environmental nonprofit that works in the Peconic and South Shore Bays, and we strictly focus on water quality and aquatic ecosystems. This right here is a runoff demo. As you can see, all these drains go from, the gas station, the marinas, they all lead to wetlands, the estuary, so that's the areas where fresh and salt water mix. And it just gives a better idea of the impacts that the individuals, as well as local industry, can have on water quality.
The Surfrider Foundation is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches. So our Blue Water Task Force tests for Enterococcus bacteria, which is a fecal bacteria. And if it's high in your local water body, it could indicate that there is sewage pollution in your local water body. As you can see, the squares are glowing, so there's bacteria in this sample. And depending on the number of small cells versus large cells that are glowing, we can determine approximate number of bacteria per milliliter. And we're hoping to just inform people before they go out for a swim whether the water is safe or not.
We're so excited to be at Doc Fest, especially talking about water quality issues. The Nature Conservancy has been heavily involved in water quality issues on Long Island for over 10 years. So the Nature Conservancy is spending a lot of time and resources trying to get out there, educate the public on what they can do to help reduce nitrogen levels in the coastal waters. So a big part of that is obviously upgrading septic systems.
Group of the East End was founded 50 years ago to protect the natural resources of eastern Long Island. All of our drinking water comes from the ground beneath our feet. So if you think of Long Island as a giant sandbar, underneath that sandbar is fresh water, comes down from the rain or melted from snow, and it creates a freshwater table. That freshwater table is where we draw all of our drinking water from, and if we're not careful, our footprint is going to exceed the capacity of that water to provide for us now and into the future.
My name is Valerie Vergona. I'm Outreach Coordinator for the Peconic Estuary Partnership. We're a national estuary program designated under the EPA. We do have a homeowner rewards program, and that reimburses folks up to $500 for purchasing plant materials for a native plant garden or for a rain garden. And we also have some information here on the Reclaim Our Water Septic Improvement Program, and that is another way that homeowners can help protect our groundwater by upgrading their septic system to one that does remove nitrogen.
It's a thrill to be here. It's so great that the environment is the center of this documentary film festival. I did one of my Enviro close-up shows with Maya Rossum. She's the force behind to have an amendment to the state constitution which provides that people are entitled to a clean environment.
We are privileged today to have Maya Van Rossum with us, who is the Delaware River Keeper, but she's also a very savvy and effective environmental attorney. And she has been advocating for the Green Amendment.
It's truly an honor to be here with you this evening. I really thank you for the opportunity to join with you in watching the powerful film that's going to be shown tonight, but also to share with you a little bit about the power of the Green Amendment movement and the Green Amendment message. I wanted to start with one of the, just a short segment of one of the stories from my book, which I think really brings home for us why fighting for the environment is so critically important. Because these aren't just abstract concepts or issues. We're talking about real people and real lives and real ecosystems that are being harmed when we allow the environment to be degraded. And so to really bring this home, I just wanted to start with what I call Gina's story. Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear, but no one had endured greater suffering or paid a higher price for Mount Ayer's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Like Gina, Kiwanis had been born with asthma. His case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your air circulation, says Gina. He really suffered. He just suffered, she adds. When Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly, but then he came home. And his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling an ambulance. She needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. Now, when people hear stories like that, they say to me, how is it possible that here in the United States of America, somebody would suffer so extremely, even lose their lives because of environmental pollution and degradation? Don't we here in the United States of America have a right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment? And the fact of the matter is, here in the United States, we have all kinds of rights. We have a right to free speech and freedom of religion. We have private property rights. We have a right to bear arms. But we do not have environmental rights. We do not have a right to clean water or clean air, a stable climate, or healthy environments. These simply are not our rights here in the United States. Instead, when it comes to the environment, what we have is a system of laws and governance that very literally focuses on legalizing environmental pollution, degradation, and harm. If you get the right reviews and the right permits from the right agencies, it is very legal to spew pollution into the air, into the water, to fill in a wetlands, to devastate an ecosystem or a population of critters that's on the brink of extinction. Our system of laws is not focused on preventing pollution, degradation, and harm first. It's also a system of laws and governance filled with gaps. There are all kinds of emerging contaminants and industrial operations that are not covered by this system of laws that we have in place, so they get away scot-free with doing what they're doing despite the fact that they're devastating lives. Or perhaps there is a law that would apply to their industry or their contaminant, but conveniently some big loophole has been written into the law that literally lets them off the hook. It is a system of laws and governance where environmental racism is literally built in, with communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities intentionally targeted for highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities. Communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities don't suffer disproportionately from higher levels of environmental pollution and degradation in spite of the environmental laws we have in place. They suffer disproportionately because of the laws we have in place because of how those laws have been intentionally written, intentionally interpreted, intentionally applied, and intentionally enforced or not enforced. It is a system of laws and governance where children are literally an afterthought and where people with money have much greater access to the levers of power and the politicians who are deciding about this system of laws. What will be written into law? What won't be? What will be enforced? What won't be? And as a result, we have real people suffering real harm, with Gina and Kiwanis just being one of millions of stories across our nation that are taking place. It is against this backdrop of this system of laws and governance that allows so much harm that I, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, have done for the last 30 years my environmental activism to protect our beautiful Delaware River and the 4 watershed states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware from the devastating harms that environmental degradation can inflict. It is against this backdrop that I have, amongst other things, been fighting against fracking. And in fact, at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, our efforts to battle against fracking have been quite successful. We have managed to keep fracking outside of anywhere within the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed. We were part of the successful movement to get a ban on fracking here in the state of New York. But we have not been successful in keeping fracking out of the portion of Pennsylvania that is not within the Delaware River watershed. Most of Pennsylvania sits outside of the Delaware River watershed, and it is in those portions of Pennsylvania where fracking has been allowed to move apace. Fracking actually came to Pennsylvania in about the mid-2000s, bringing with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations, its devastation of the ecosystems and the natural systems and communities of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, bringing with it the pollution of our rivers, our streams, our aquifers, our wetlands, even contamination of drinking water supplies, bringing with it air contamination of all kinds, including climate-changing methane emissions. And given the state of the law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it was pretty easy for fracking to overwhelm Pennsylvania's communities and Pennsylvania's environments. But the way I view it, for the frackers, it wasn't easy enough. They wanted to find a way to make it even easier for themselves. So in 2012, leaders from the fracking industry literally went behind closed doors and wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. A piece of legislation that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature in 2012 and signed by the governor, and was literally a gift basket to the industry. And of course it was. They wrote it for themselves. And Act 13, right, did a whole lot of bad things when it came to fracking, right? Gave a whole lot of gifts to the industry. Just by way of example of 3 things that Act 13 did. Act 13 put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards that would apply to every other industry, but now would not apply to fracking. Act 13 alleviated the fracking industry of the obligation to notify those in Pennsylvania who are on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by nearby fracking operations. Act 13 preempted local zoning authority and literally mandated that fracking be allowed to happen in every part of every community in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in the historic preservation zones, the environmental protection areas, in the heart of residential communities, by homes, hospitals, playgrounds, schools. By virtue of Act 13, communities had to allow drilling and operating fracking well pads with their 24/7 noise, light, and pollution to be located as close as 300 feet, less than a football field, from people's homes. And so the fact of the matter is, while in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when it came to fracking, while things were already really, really bad, if Act 13 had been allowed to go into play, things were going to get exponentially worse. So I, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, and the Delaware Riverkeeper, my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, knew that we had to find a way to defeat this law, to stop it before it even started. But the truth is, What do you do when you have a law that's passed by the legislature and signed by the governor? There really aren't very many options because they truly have all the power, right? You can protest, you can try to get them to amend the law or repeal the law. That wasn't going to happen. They had just passed it. You could try to elect better people to office so down the line maybe the law will be amended or repealed. That protection comes way too late. You can sit down, shut up, and take it. And anybody who knows me knows that I won't sit down, shut up, and take it when it comes to the environment. So we were thinking, what will we do? How can we challenge this? And we decided we were going to bring a legal challenge. We were going to challenge Act 13 in court. And when we were thinking about what would our legal arguments be, we remembered that in the Pennsylvania Constitution, in the Bill of Rights section, there was this long ignored right of the people to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. It was an amendment that had been added to the Pennsylvania Constitution in 1971, but had been robbed of all of its legal strength almost as soon as it had been added to the Constitution by bad legal precedents. The court had declared this right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment to be just good policy, meaning good advice. And government officials could take it or could leave it, right? Protect it or not. It didn't really matter. It didn't really make a difference. And so that's the way things stood in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 42 years. This powerful language in the Pennsylvania Constitution protecting the right of the people to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. But nothing had changed on the ground. Well, we felt at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, as we were developing our legal arguments, that perhaps we were in a moment in time where we had this such egregious overreach by the industry and their friends in the legislature that was going to result in such devastating ecological harm if Act 13 had been allowed to go in place, that maybe we were in a moment in time when we could get the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to reconsider that 42 years of bad precedent and overturn it and restore power to Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. We were joined by 7 municipalities in our legal challenge, and the case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a very conservative Supreme Court. But despite how conservative that Supreme Court was and the fact that it was led by a conservative Chief Justice, in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory. And the plurality opinion was actually written by that conservative Chief Justice. And I want you to read with me some of the things that Chief Justice Ronald Castile wrote in the opinion that came out in December of 2013. He wrote that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty. And that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact unconstitutional because they would violate the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And in that moment, with that victory, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, preventing them from ever going into play and wreaking their devastating havoc and harm on the people and ecosystems of Pennsylvania. But just as important, what we also did in that moment was we breathed legal life into that long-ignored Environmental Rights Amendment and restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. It was a really powerful victory. Now, in the wake of that victory, right, we were going forth and taking advantage of this newly minted constitutional or newly revived constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And as we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and other organizations were going forth, taking advantage, right, of this newly enlivened constitutional right, I kept thinking about the power and the importance of what we had accomplished. How we had achieved this victory only because of that Bill of Rights provision in the Pennsylvania Constitution. And I decided that we needed to have this kind of constitutional environmental rights protection in every state across our nation. So I looked at the Pennsylvania Constitution to figure out what was special about it. What made it so powerful that we were able to use it to overturn this law? And I identified the race. I laid out all these criteria, all the elements that were so powerful, and I labeled them, I now label them my Green Amendment criteria, because that's what my book is called, the Green Amendment. At the time, I didn't do that, but now they're the Green Amendment criteria. And I looked at every single constitution across the nation, and I found that there was only one other state, Montana, that had an environmental rights provision of this kind. There were a whole lot of other states that talked about the environment, even talked about environmental rights in their constitutions, but they didn't give this same highest constitutional protection and recognition to the environmental rights of the people of their states. When I saw that, only Pennsylvania and Montana, and all these other states with this language that sounds pretty but did nothing for the most part, I decided it was time to change that, and that's sort of how the Green Amendment movement was born. I just started going state by state by state, talking with people about this powerful pathway. I wrote the first edition of the book and just started to share the message, and that's really how the Green Amendment movement was born. I want you to know that Green Amendments are really empowering. They bring transformational change when it comes to the environment. They empower people and they empower the law. Legally, they lift up environmental rights, so they are given the same highest constitutional standing as those other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. We all know how powerfully the right to free speech and freedom of religion are protected, right? Now that same power comes to bear for the environment. They require that all government officials at every level of government in the state become constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights and the natural resources of the state for the benefit of all people. And they have to ensure that these environmental rights and natural resources are protected equitably, regardless of race, ethnicity, tribal membership status, socioeconomics, geography. We all have the same constitutional right, and our government officials must protect them equitably. So no more environmental racism. And future generations get critical protections too, which of course we all know how important that is, particularly given the climate crisis we're facing. But they need it when it comes to water, ecosystems, right, critters of all kinds. It's so important we protect our environment for future generations. Green amendments do that. The goal of a Green Amendment is to get better decisions out of our government officials, right? So that we don't have to sue them. But the reality of a Green Amendment is when our government officials get it wrong, we get access to the courts in order to vindicate our constitutional rights and to get a needed remedy. But Green Amendments are also empowering for activists, because now when activists rise up to defend the environments and the communities that they care about in the face of, proposed ecological devastation, now people are rising up to defend the forests they love, the people they love, the rivers they love, the wetlands they love, the critters they love, but they are also rising up to champion their constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And that's so empowering for an activist. They can no longer just be dismissed as tree huggers or fish lovers, right? Or job killers or people haters. They are now true US patriots rising up to defend the Constitution. And that's very empowering intellectually and emotionally for activists as they stand there and face the challenges of being an activist. And all the government officials on the decision-making table have to take them more seriously, because they're now talking about the constitutional obligation of those government officials. This is a nationwide movement. We're starting at the states. We're going state by state by state, getting constitutional Green Amendments passed, because states have incredible power when it comes to the environment. So by getting Green Amendments in the Bill of Rights section of every state constitution across our nation, we're getting powerful and meaningful change. And we're also laying the foundation necessary to ultimately get a federal Green Amendment, because we need that too. We need them both. And our amendment is moving forth with such great power. And as you heard, just last year, the Green Amendment was added to the New York Constitution. You all voted on it November 2nd of 2021, and by over 70% of the vote, it passed. So January 1, 2022, it was added to the Constitution. And we have Green Amendments advancing in 15 other states, with more and more interest coming on board all the time. States, not just states like Maine and New Jersey and New York, but states like Texas and Arizona and Nevada and New Mexico and Iowa, right? So it's really powerful, and it really resonates because it does bring transformational change. Here in New York, we've already started just this year to see the first court decisions coming out, and I'm not going to go into them, but here are just 2 quotes coming out of the first court decision in New York based on Article 1, Section 19 of the New York Green Amendment. The state must ensure that its citizens have the right to clean air and a healthful environment. Complying with the Constitution is not optional. And they were talking about the Environmental Rights Amendment. So this Green Amendment movement is powerful and it's growing, but it's people-driven. So if you're interested in joining the Green Amendment movement in New York or nationwide, go to forthegenerations.org and get involved. People always ask me, how are you funded? They want to make sure that I won't sell out. We don't sell out. We're funded by donations and grants. We're not taking money from big business. And I just want to finish with one final concluding reading from the book that, to me, I think really sums it all up. And of course, I think it sums it up because I wrote it. So, no matter where you happen to live, I'm here to say that you should dramatically raise your expectations when it comes to the environment. You have a right to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. This right is inherent and indefeasible. It belongs to you. Many politicians rail against entitlements and dismiss millennials as an entitled generation, but they've got it wrong. Entitlement is not a dirty word. It is a recognition of rights. And make no mistake, when it comes to the environment, you are entitled. So.